Bible to Galatians chapter 1. In Galatians chapter 1, go to verse 11. But I certify you, brothers, that the gospel which was preached of me is not after man. For I neither received it of man, neither was I taught it by man, but I was taught by the revelation of Jesus Christ. For you have heard of my conversation in times past in the Jewish religion, how that beyond measure I persecuted the church of God, and I wasted it. And I profited in the Jews' religion above many my equals in my own nation, being more exceedingly zealous of the traditions of my fathers. And so now then, go over to chapter 2. So a little background for this verse so I don't read the whole thing. There were some Jewish Christians who had come to visit, and while they were there, they were holding on to their traditions, and they were saying that it wasn't right to eat with people who weren't like them and didn't do things the way that they did. Paul says in this letter, in verse 11, he says, when Peter was come to Antioch, I withstood him to the face. In other words, I got up in his face. And he did that because Peter had separated himself away from these other people because he cared about the opinion of these other, of the circumcision, is the way the Bible puts it. And so Paul says, when I saw that they weren't acting like they should, I got up in Peter's face. And in verse 16 he says, knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ, even we have believed in Jesus Christ that we might be justified by the faith of Christ, and not by the works of the law. For by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified. But if while we seek to be justified by Christ, we ourselves also are found to be sinners, is therefore Christ the minister of sin? God forbid. For if I build again the things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor. For I through the law am dead to the law, that I might live unto God. But I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me, and the life which I now live in the flesh I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not frustrate the grace of God, for if righteousness came by the law, then Christ is dead in vain. Paul is making the case very clearly, in my opinion, and it's no wonder that the Jews hated him and wanted to kill him, because he said, doing good works is not going to get you into heaven. It's not going to do you any good. The gospel is that we come to Jesus by faith. Paul says, it's not me, it's God in me. There are some people who want to say that the Bible doesn't say to ask Jesus into your heart. I'm not sure why they say that, but this verse very clearly says that Paul has been taken over by the Spirit of God, and he has been changed, and he has been made righteous by God taking over the person who he is on the inside, the spiritual man who's on the inside. And as we have talked about, you're a three-part being. You have a spirit, you are a soul, and you live in a body. The good things that we do, we don't do them out of our own flesh. Our flesh is stupid and selfish. But our flesh can be trained to follow our nature. And our nature, when we have allowed God into our life, our nature is like God. And it is good like God. Paul is explaining to us in just a few words here that the gospel is good news because we are not having to come to God on the basis of our own keeping of rules and regulations and traditions. We are coming to God simply as children, recognizing our weakness and saying, God, I'm weak, and I need you. That's all God needs, really. I mean, if you grow up in certain sects and denominations and religions, you have this idea that you're trying to get good enough to be able to come to God. I want to poke a pin in that right here and just tell you, you're never going to make it. You're just not. You can't. You're not going to ever be good enough. It's impossible. The only way that you can be good enough to come before God is to come having received the substitution of Jesus. And He makes it possible for us to come into God's presence because Jesus said, "Hey, Dad, this is my brother." And God says, "Come on in." You don't get there by being good. Goodness only comes from who you already are inside. And who you are inside is only made good by the grace of God in you. And He says, "Will you accept my nature as your nature?" And we say, "Yes, Lord." That's how you get into the club. That's how you're jumped in. If you want to get into the family of God, there's only one way in. The only way into the family of God is the substitutionary sacrifice of Jesus. Jesus is my substitute, and He allows me to come in as His beneficiary. This is why it's so difficult for people to understand. When Christians say there's only one way to God, they're not saying our way is the right way and we follow all the rules. They are saying that Jesus is the only one who can let us in. The Bible calls Him the door. He is the way that you get to God because you come through His sacrifice and His substitution. It's as though you were going to the electric chair and someone said, "I will be His substitute." And so they died in your place and now you're free. You walk out of the prison completely free and able to go back into society because somebody else died for you. The beauty of this is you're not just going back into society as your old self. You're going back into society with the nature of the person who died for you. They come in and they remake you in God's image so that you have the nature of God living in you, and that nature is telling you to not do things that are, as Paul says, not expedient. Alright, so I don't want to completely re-preach the same sermon every day, but you understand, this is the gospel that we have been saved from ourselves, from sin, from death, from destruction. We have been saved from everything bad by accepting Jesus' substitution for us. And there's a lot of people who are saying, well, that's too easy. Maybe so. It's not really easy, though. It's a lot harder than you think. Just making the decision to accept God's way of doing things and being in your own nature and resisting the temptation to follow other input is obviously, and you know this if you've ever tried, it's a lot harder than you think. And so we make the decision every day to surrender to God's will and not make the sin of Eve by thinking that we're smarter than God and we know more than God. Alright, so we'll come back tomorrow. We'll talk some more about the gospel. You be blessed. We'll see you then. Alright, bye-bye.
What goes up must come down.